Welcome to the Omnigamers Club podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including Fix It Felix Jr., available at your favorite video arcade. I
Yeah, that's a
am Daniel
mouthful.
Winter.
And I'm Mark USA.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not saying that three times fast. Yes, so Mark, we're coming off our session one for a new role-playing session of Scum and Villainy. So more on that next episode, I'm
absolutely.
sure, and
It
a
was
long
like session
weekend. Yeah.
1.0.5. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, yeah, we're easing in with half of a party basically, but it gives us all a chance to ease into new system, new friends, making some good progress there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about our main topic, talking about one single game. And what game was that again, Daniel?
That is Disney's Lorcana. Can't forget the mega corporate addendum on the name there. That is the deck building game, trading card game, TCG, I guess you could call it, from Disney and Ravensburger, designed by Ryan Miller and Steve Warner. There are a lot of artists, so I won't bore you all with listing those names off, but there are some excellent artists there, so go check that out.
Yeah, tons and tons, even from our neck of the woods up here in Vancouver. Yeah, that's right. So this game is a trading card game. It does come in blind packages, other than the starter decks, of which there are quite a few now. And I think I even saw like a 2-player starter set at Rain City Games when we were there the other day.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, it's gonna be hard to talk about this game without talking about it in terms of as a product, as in addition to just as a game, but also without comparing it to the TCGs that came before your Magic the Gatherings and various other inspirations. This is drawing from a long lineage. So we'll try
Right.
and limit that where possible and talk about it on its own terms, but that
Yeah.
obviously is going to need to come up at some point.
And we should also, touching upon the last point you made, the one previous, that we should put it in context of time and place. So we are about 1 year after the game initially launched. This is the fall of 2024 when you're when we're first recording this. So that is something to consider as well, because there's usually changes in a game when it's a living game like this, and it changes from set to set, and it's had a chance to reach a different level of maturity, and kind of it's past its like initial kind of honeymoon phase. It's leveling out in terms of the user base as well.
Yeah, it certainly had a rocky start. You and I both attended a sort of a launch event when the game first came out at Rain City Games there. It had good fun, but the game was very hard to get hold of those cards, right? We gave our initial impressions and we wanted to give some more in-depth thoughts, but you just couldn't find the cards without spending like double MRSP at the time. So we wanted to give it some time, both for the supply situation to stabilize and for the design sort of environment to stabilize. So we've just now seen set 5, Shimmering Skies, just came out a month or so ago. Set 6 is on the way. So the game is still alive. I'll give it that. They don't seem to be slowing down right now. So I thought it'd be a good time, 1 year into Lorcana, to just have a look at the state of the game and what we think of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with a basic explanation of how this game shakes out. It is a competitive game, so for now, that's
Well,
the default way to play from
there's
the
already
outset.
a cooperative version of this game out.
Okay, but from the
Yes.
outset, it's initially intended to be competitive and one-on-one, but I believe there are multiplayer formats available as well. So for the most part, we're going to be talking about like the default format, and we
Yes.
might have opportunities to talk about variants later on. So unlike a game like Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh, we're not trying to defeat another wizard or bring down health points or something like that. This is more akin to a game like Keyforge, where you're racing towards a sort of a finish line, where we don't actually have to fight each other at all to win this game, or one can be entirely defensive. You don't have to attack. I suppose you could say that about Magic the Gathering as well. But I'm bearing the lead here. You're trying to race to the first to 20 points of something called lore. So Lorcana, lore makes sense.
Yeah, we've spoken a little bit about Keyforge and how we like that system, how it's that race encourages a better sense of engine building, right? You focus on your own engine, building that out rather than taking away from the other player. In Magic the Gathering, there's no way to win without going through your opponent. Here, it's very much more a defensive system where you don't have to interact at all. There are forms of interaction, which we'll get to. There is combat that you can engage with, but you can absolutely win this game without interacting with your opponent at all, for better or worse. I mean, that take that of Magic can feel very mean. I like Magic, but we spoke about in Unmatched. I don't love one-on-one direct conflict games, right? Uh, so this lets you focus on on achieving something rather than taking away from someone else.
Right. And the bones of this game are quite similar to some of those other card games that we mentioned. There are these sort of character cards, which are the sort of like the creature equivalent. So there are subsets of these, but we won't go exhaustively into them. I think there's like heroes, there's villains, and there's allies, I suppose, is another one. So they're mostly the same. They have a sort of a toughness when they challenge, sorry, a power, so like an attack value essentially, when they challenge, which is what they call attacking in this game. And they have a toughness or health, which is the sort of hit points that the
Defensive value.
character
Yeah.
might have. And there's various ratios and balances of that, but pretty much all characters have that. There are items, as you might think. They pretty much exist as permanents out on the table after you pay their initial cost, and they can be used passively or used actively if you pay a certain amount of money, essentially ink, which is what this game calls it, or tap the card, which is called exerting.
Legally distinct from
Yes,
tapping.
legally distinct, but also turning 90 degrees. There's a couple other cards as well, actions. So there's basic actions, and then there's something unique called songs, which I think is very thematic.
Yeah.
You want to explain a little bit about songs, Daniel?
Yeah, so songs is kind of a subtype of actions. They generally they tend to be like one use card, use it and discard, but they're special in that a character can be exhausted to sing that song. So you might have a Brave New World, your Aladdin song there that would normally cost say five. I don't have the exact cards in front of me. I'm just making up these mana values as I go. Are we doing
Yeah.
that as we go?
I'm also sorry, Daniel, but I have to break in here with the Disney accuracy police. It's called A Whole New World, that song in Aladdin. Brave New
Right.
World is a novel by Aldous Huxley. So
Okay, don't get those
close.
confused. They don't want to radicalize the kids that
I don't
early.
want the posters flaming us on all the message boards.
Thank you.
Like we have that kind of
a
following.
whole new world. There you go.
And
You can-
most of the time, it doesn't have to be the character, like the typical character
No.
that's associated with that song. It doesn't have to be Aladdin. It could be Ariel singing A Whole New World, and it could be Aladdin singing Part of Your World, which is Ariel's song. There are probably going to be exceptions because that's how these card games sort of go, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, these rules are designed to be broken, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, these songs you can either pay the full mana cost as printed on the card, or you can have a character sing it, which is basically to exert. I can.
It's exert, yeah.
exert a character to basically pay a reduced cost. Sometimes free, sometimes reduced, but it basically gives you another way of using the characters without. If you don't want to use them for combat, for example, you can exert them for other things, including reducing the cost of cards, but potentially ramping up, paying higher cost cards sooner. So it shifts up the ramp of the power curve there.
Yeah, the other day I think I had to exhaust like 3 characters to get up to the 8 ink that's required to play this one card. Before we talk about ink briefly, I'm going to mention the one last type of card, which was new to me. I think it's a newer card type in general. It didn't exist when the game first came out. It's called locations.
Yes, that came out in set 3, I believe. Yeah.
Right. And locations are fairly basic. For instance, I have here the Casa Madrigal from Encanto, and they have a cost to play, a sort of a toughness like the character cards do, but they don't have an attack for the most part. They do have an effect. Sometimes that's just like generating an amount of lore at the beginning of each turn. And that's like the default, the typical usage. And then they also have another printed effect and then a cost to move characters to that location.
Mm.
And whatever that effect that might be triggered is different from location to location.
Yeah, like there's oftentimes no explicit benefit to moving a character to a location. There's no inherent defense or value to that, other than some locations and some characters will have synergies when that happens. By themselves, they don't necessarily do much. Some of them will have a passive lore generation value that you can, like, at the start of each turn, you'll generate some lore. More on that later. But they're a new way of generating various synergies. But at the same note, they're also just another element of that Disney flavor, right? Like locations expressing those worlds in another way to show off the Disney IP, right?
Yeah, I think I'll just give my opinion on locations. I think they're much welcome because
Mhm.
the game was kind of sorely lacking in some complexity before locations were added, and they do seem to add another wrinkle into the mix.
They are
Uh,
situational, but okay,
for
some
sure.
decks will be make a lot of use of them by themselves. Don't do much, but it's another tool in the belt to build a deck around. And I'm sure we'll see more different types, card types added to this game as it
Right.
evolves.
And I wanted to talk about Ink very briefly because it's a little bit different than some of the other
Yeah, well,
games.
I think that's probably one of the more interesting parts to discuss about this game.
Yeah. So this game has cards, and they have a different icon in the corner around the cost to play the card. So there's a
Hmm.
number in the corner, and that's simply the cost to play the card. And you don't have different mana, say, colors in this game. You don't even have mana cards per se. What you do have is cards that have this little swirly special symbol around it in the corner. And any cards that have that symbol can be played face down in front of you as ink. And
Hmm.
that's just indicated by that little swirly Lorcana icon on the back. And those cards can no longer be used, typically. Since they're placed face down, you can put one per turn as ink, and you would simply exert them, turn them 90 degrees, and you can pay to spend that much towards a cost of playing a card. And that's why none of these cards have a particular color cost. They just have a straight up number. And the ones that don't have that flourish border around their number cannot be uh,
The
played face down as
uninkable.
ink.
Yeah, so yeah, this is probably one of the more interesting systems in this game. Not necessarily new. I did see that it was utilized, or some similar version of it was utilized in both the World of Warcraft trading card game, but also Duel Masters, which apparently still going in Japan, as I imagine many TCGs are. So yeah, basically, I've played my fair share of Magic the Gathering. It's a bit of a sticking point in that game that you have land cards that basically their only use is to play those cards as mana. And there could be a wide variety of situations in which you have too little or too many of those cards that will completely break down any strategy. A lot of variance in how that mana ramp can play out in Magic. Whereas here, most of the time you can ink a card in your deck, and if you've got a handful of uninkable cards, well, you've built your deck that way, right? There's this interesting degree in which you decide as a player how much risk you want to put into your deck. How many of your cards do you want to be inkable or uninkable? Those uninkable cards do tend to be more powerful, but there's a balance there to be found in how many of those you can fit in there before it starts to get too unpredictable. So it's giving a lot more agency to the player. At the same time, though, from turn one, you have an interesting decision in front of you, right? Like I've got I draw 7 cards. I can play any one of these 7 cards as an ink. Which one is it going to be? And so you're
Yeah.
immediately prioritizing the value of your cards in your hand.
And even before round one is when you have interesting choices to make,
Mm.
because of course this game has a mulligan policy, and if you find that you don't have any inkable cards in your hand, you can take, I believe the rule is any number of cards from the initial 7 you draw and place them at the bottom of your deck, and then draw up that many more into your hand until you have 7. Is,
Yeah,
I
it's a
believe,
very flexible mulligan system. You're not discarding your entire hand. You can
right?
individual cards basically. You can decide
Yeah,
to
it's
discard
pretty
and redraw.
generous actually, I think. And a lot of this game, a lot of the rules in this game are generous. So essentially, other things that happen is the setup is quite simple. Well, you just shuffle your deck. You draw 7 cards. You can mulligan optionally if you want to. The player that goes first does not draw a card
That's pretty
on their
standard.
very first turn. And then every player draws a card at the beginning of their turn on each subsequent turn. So that's very easy to remember as well.
And speaking of which, I do really like in the rules that like, this game comes with rules. Magic the Gathering does not come with rules anymore. It's wild how that game goes out of its way to not teach players the game. But yeah, you get a little rules booklet with the starter decks that are very helpful. And one note I found really useful for sort of framing teaching the game: the ready, set, draw. Like at the start of your turn, you ready your cards, you unexert them. Set is like set off any start of turn abilities and then draw a card, right? It's a really cool mnemonic to remember, especially for new players, how that turn structure works. Because beyond that, it's an incredibly flexible turn structure as well.
Right. Yeah, I like games that have like a good mnemonic device like that. I think the deck building game Dominion has the ABC. You get one action, one buy, and one, I don't know, whatever after that. But it's always handy to have a device like that. But all in all, like it's nice that you have the simple summary at the end, at the back of the book. And absolutely, having this rule book in each starter deck, let's be honest, it doesn't come in every pack of cards, is really nice. And there's actually one page at the back of each of these rule books that will tell you what the sort of the theme or the strategy of that particular starter deck is.
Just give you some general guidance and sense of strategy.
A leg up on how to play that. And you'll notice that these decks, the starter decks, typically have 2 colors associated with them. So like Magic the Gathering, there's a color wheel, essentially. And I think there are, 6 colors?
6 colors, yes.
Yeah. 6 colors,
no colorless cards like in Magic. Yeah.
Right. And they all represent a sort of like a leaning or a sort of a style of play. Yeah, to be very honest, I haven't invested a lot of time or money into this game. I've mostly been playing by the generosity of one Daniel Winter for borrowing his cards. But yeah, absolutely. The deck construction, you have to have 60 cards. The deck can't contain more than 4 copies of any single card.
Right.
And a deck can only contain cards from 1 or 2 inks.
Oh, there you go.
You could have a monocolor if you wish.
Right. Which I don't think I've seen. That's not really it hasn't been a strategy going forward. I will say, so if we're going to talk about color identity, I don't, at least in those starter decks, there isn't really a strong sense of how those colors excel in any particular strategy. At least in the sense that there's a lot of filler cards, right? There's a lot of 2-cost characters that have 2 attack and 2 defense across all of the colors, and there's going to be like 50 cards or more by now, like that have the exact same stats across all the colors, and those starter decks have a lot of those. So
it's true.
There's a lot of crossover, a lot of character. Like, there's no character identity in those decks. Like you have Simba appears in all 6 colors, right? So they're not thematically cohesive. Not to say that's a bad thing. Like if you want a particular character, you're not locked to a color, right?
Yeah, I don't know what all the colors mean, but they do mean something different. But I found that I do like certain kinds of decks. I like this amber and purple combination quite a lot. That was my initial starter deck, and this was the decks that I've enjoyed from later sets as well, and the cards I've enjoyed from later sets. So I think there's some meaning there in the colors.
Oh, there absolutely is. My point is just more that you don't really see the full expression, the full potential of those colors until you start playing with these more powerful cards, building your own deck. I don't think the starter decks do a good job of showing the strengths of those colors necessarily.
Right, and it's not so strict as you say. There are those filler cards. And thematically, it's hard to tell because those characters appear in all the different colors. Yeah, you're right there. So let's talk about the flow of this game. So most typically, you get some ink going, you get some creatures going, and most of the time, the creatures will have a lore ability. And when you exert a character, so when you play a character, they are sort of tired, their mana sickness at the beginning when they're first played, so you can't use them right away. But from the subsequent turn after they're played, that you can exert them to do a couple of things. You can exert them to quest, and questing is the most basic way that you earn lore. So a card might have one or more lore symbols on them, and that's this little diamond symbol on the corner of some of the character cards. And some have two or even three lore on them with other conditions that might occur. So exerting those characters to quest is how you earn that basic amount of lore. There might be extra effects that get triggered as well, but that's the most basic way you get lore. And interesting enough, exerting a character is the only way that they become susceptible or to become targets of challenges. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So, just quickly in terms of that, the lore stat there. For one thing, I do think that's quite an effective as a tool in the designer's belt to tweak cards in terms of card identity and balance. Is like it's a third stat basically, in addition to strength and defense and mana cost. I guess there's now also the lore value to just further tweak the identity of these cards. So yeah, so then you've got the combat to keep in mind, and so there are direct damage cards. There's a lot of like just do 1-2 damage to any character, whether they're exerted or not. But broadly, most of the damage here is going to be dealt in combat, which only occurs with exerted characters. So if you play a Robin Hood, he's got a high quest value. It's a power card. You broadly can assume that you're going to have the opportunity to at least trigger him once to tap him before he can be targeted, right? And it's curious here. So in Magic, for example, when you attack, you have to attack your opponent to do damage, but then that opponent has all the agency in which characters attacks which defenders, and they have so the defender has all the agency in this game in Magic. In Lorcana, the attacker actually has all the agency. So you line up with this. So Simba's going to attack Aladdin, and Zazu is going to attack Wreck-It Ralph, and you can line up those setups basically 1-to-1, and you can make some pretty clever trades there. Like you can be quite tricky in trying to make the right trades. It can be a bit of a trap, I think, in this game, focusing too much on that combat, especially if you're coming in from other games and assuming that combat is the path to victory, when oftentimes it's just putting you further and further behind, trying to keep your opponent down, and then they just keep playing new characters, right? So there is some useful strategy in combat in this game that you can be quite clever with, but I think you have to be careful not to to lean on that too much.
Yeah, you make a good point there, because when you do challenge, you don't quest. It's it's an alternate usage of a character. So quite explicitly, they don't earn lore when they are used for challenge. And the other negative result is that you may die if you get enough attack damage dealt back to you. So only an exerted character can be challenged, can be the target of a challenge, and only a ready character can challenge themselves another target, a target of their choosing. This is the basic. Of course, there's other situations where some characters start in play exerted, so they come into play exerted, which means they can be the target right away, but there's usually a nice benefit that comes along with that. And there are other characters' abilities such as Rush, which allow characters that are played right away. They can't quest, but they can challenge. So that's pretty typical of a TCG. There's always going to be some ability that breaks a rule.
You've got palette swaps for all the magic abilities. You've got evasive instead of flying. You've got rush instead of haste. You've got like bodyguard. I don't think it's an equivalent, but like bodyguard is basically a taunt. I think that comes more from Hearthstone, I guess. So you have to attack a bodyguard before anything else. So there are some cool combat tricks
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. This game does liberally sort of borrow from games left, right, and center, and that's to be expected. Why don't you crib from the best? And I do like a lot of the aspects that it brings from other games, and it does it in a very streamlined package. And that's one of the strengths of this game.
Yeah, well, I actually want to tangent into some of the card design and talk about that a little bit. And yes, these are absolutely streamlined. That's a great word for it. Partly, I think like the mana cost for one thing. This is one value. Every card has one mana cost. It's very clear, one number in the top corner. That's it. Like Magic, you might have 2 or 3 colors in these tiny little bubbles in the corner. Magic is stuck in a 30-year-old graphic design that it cannot escape. Whereas this is a good opportunity to revisit that with some more modern sensibilities. Very easy to read cards. You can fan them out and see very easily what costs what, right? There's some you've got those other identities like the attack and defense and lore values that are all, again, very clear, large numbers, easy to read. One of the cool things I've hadn't noticed myself, but I've speaking to a couple of the artists for the game, they've both pointed out that there is a mandate basically that all of the colors basically have a visual identity. So like all certain shapes associated with them to add to the readability of the cards. Like the green cards might have more sort of nature elements, for example. And those colors often just like the blue cards tend to be more blue, right? Simple.
It's true. Yeah, the background elements will have a decent amount of the shade of the color type of the card. And like we explained earlier, you can have one or two types. So you're going to pretty much understand that you're going to have a set palette for the types of cards that you see. And is this a good time to talk about the artwork?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what we can say other than generally the artwork is very good. Like these are Disney characters, right? There's only so much liberty they can take with them. They have to be somewhat on model, but yeah, they're all generally very good, very very bright pop art that pops really nicely. There is this cool feature in the game where there's basically these three archetypes. So you've got the characters that are storyborn, in that they're the characters as they appear in their original stories. You've got dreamborn that are like little quirky like variants, like alternate reality versions of these characters. Then you have floodborn characters that are really quite different and flesh out those characters in really wild, wacky ways, right?
Right. So in the latter two examples, you might have characters like Anna from Frozen, for instance, who's kind of more not really a fighter. She's more a talker and more cerebral. But you might see her in like a suit of armor or something like that.
Mm.
Passive characters be more aggressive. You see, they're kind of playing out of type.
Or like one of my favorites is Gaston as like an inventor, like a mad scientist.
Yeah, it's pretty much what you would not expect out of those characters. And I think that's part of the draw because, let's be honest, a big part of TCGs is the collectability of them. I don't want to open up that basket that large topic just yet, but creating the beautiful art and creating a sort of telling a story with the artwork is part of what it's there to do, right? This game wouldn't exist with all the decades of Disney lore, and it wouldn't exist without the fandom behind each of these Disney properties over all the years.
Yeah, there is a real playfulness with the IP here. I mean, they have to be already. There's like 12 different Simbas. There's only so many ways you can express that character, right? They're already returning to the same wells over and over again, and so you really need that option to be able to break out of those frameworks. I will say that like the Dreamborn characters, that sort of in between archetype, it's a little bit like sort of you know in like Overwatch you have the different skins, but half of them are just different color palette swaps, right? A lot of them, like I can't really tell the difference with a lot of these Dreamborn characters, and even some of the Floodborns, they're not that out there. It's like, okay, Jafar's wearing a different cloak, right?
Yeah, I see why they did them, why they created those sort of like modes, because let's be honest, certain fandoms are not very generous with interpretations of their favorite material. People will cry foul about breaking canon. This scene never happened. These two characters didn't meet that sort of scenario. So I think they just grant themselves the liberty, the grace to be able to create more a broader story with certain characters, see them in sort of like the what if scenarios that genres like Futurama or Marvel for instance has a literal series called What If. So they let themselves tell these alternate situations that never did happen on the big screen, and I think it's very smart. They basically didn't let themselves be painted into a corner.
Yeah, I do worry about what the extent of this game is in terms of how often can they keep having new even with those Floodborns, how many different versions of Mickey Mouse can they rely on? How many different versions of Simba, right? There's a few movies they haven't gone to yet. Like I imagine, like Toy Story, for example, will be a big one when they get to that. But there's still only there's a very limited selection of Disney. As broad as Disney is, they've already covered so much of it, and
Yeah.
they're
I
gonna run
personally,
out sooner or
yeah,
later.
I personally don't share that fear with you. I mean, if you look at another game like Magic the Gathering, how many
Mm.
Chandras have there been? You
Oh
know,
yeah,
how
yeah.
many? I don't remember any Garrix have there
But there's
been.
like
There's
at least one
dozens of them.
per set at most, right? Whereas they're
Right.
already so saturated on certain characters here. I
Yeah.
don't know how oversaturated they can really get with those. I know.
This game will continue to have new sets come out. Older sets will continue to go out of print,
Of
and
course.
so that the breadth of the cards out there will change. But typically, these games they're intended to be live services, essentially. So people will always seek out the new products so long as the game is vibrant enough and the community is vibrant enough. Yeah, they'll keep returning to that well. And on the flip side of that, yeah, they have to always show their popular character, but they're also digging deep into the back catalog
Oh yeah.
of all these older properties and side characters, of which, a good third of the cards I see, I don't know who these characters
Yeah,
are.
I would have really liked them to have like just in small text at the bottom. What movie is this
Yeah,
vulture from? Right? Like,
that would have been great. I totally agree with you there. It needs
mm,
that.
yeah. So to we tangent here into talking about the theme and how it's sort of expressed through some of these cards, perhaps.
Okay.
There was an interesting point there I wanted to get into in terms of some of the resonance that these cards, how these cards express characters through mechanics, right? You've got things like Tinkerbell tends to be evasive. A lot of Tinkerbell cards are evasive. That makes sense. She's a fairy. She flies away, right? Or Hercules tends to be, a lot of his cards are bodyguard, and you think that's so Hercules, right? There is when that happens, there's these really cool thematic moments of resonance where the cards act like the characters.
Yes. I think that occurs in a positive way, in a clever way, in a
Mm,
very boring way. So let me give you a couple of
yeah.
examples. So I think an easy, cheap, sort of uninspired way is when you have one character that is associated with another character have to work with cards that have the same name. So obvious examples of this are there's from the Little Mermaid, there's the eels Flotsam and Jetsam.
Mm.
They buff each other.
Or
There's
Pain and Panic from Hercules.
yeah,
Yeah.
or the fairy godmother and Cinderella, or Snow White and all of the seven dwarves, or the Casa Madrigal, the magical family. All these sort of cards designed to work only with cards of a certain type. And I think there can be clever ways of doing that. But when it's just simply this card is like no use unless you have this other card, I think that's cheap and weak, and I don't appreciate that
So
style of
there
design.
was one. There's a card for there's a Dalmatian puppy. I can't remember what it's called, but it's one of the Dalmatian puppies. And basically, the flavor text is you can have 99 copies of this card in your deck. Cool. No one's ever going to do that.
Why?
Yeah, so that's partly what I wanted to get to, and that there's some of these cards are really flavorful, but some of them are flavor more than theme, right?
Yes.
Like a lot of them are defined by what they can't do. There's a like an Ariel card who her ability is she can't sing because she lost her voice. Get it? Or like it's really situational abilities that no one would ever build a deck with those abilities in mind. They're there for flavor more than they are to be an actual meaningful mechanic. And again, that flavor is cool when it hits, but thematically, it doesn't really do much for the game itself.
It's basically the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the movie screen a meme all
Mm.
throughout. And I think you know why that's there, because it's fan service. This game is for Disney fans. You want to cater to the Disney fans and show them, "Hey, you remember this? Yeah, we're doing that. We went there. It's so great." And I think there are good ways and bad ways to do it. So I
Mm.
pointed out a bad way to do it. I think the deck, one of the starter decks that you lent me, the one that features prominently the Madrigal family from
Yes.
Encanto, is actually pretty clever. First of all, there's a Casa Madrigal, and if ever there was a location that deserved its own card, it's that one, because the Casa Madrigal is literally a character in that movie.
Mm.
It's fresh on my mind because my youngest kid made us watch it quite a lot. And that game also, that movie also features a pretty broad cast. So there's lots of characters you can draw upon, similar to, I guess, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So this deck basically encourages you to move as many Madrigal characters to the Casa Madrigal as possible, and then there are synergies that evolve there. And the thing
Mm.
I like about that is because there's so many characters, you can have like little sub synergies within the overall theme of the deck. And even beyond that, I think this deck is fairly well designed thematically and mechanically. So there's a nice balance there. And also, one thing that I was really delighted to see is, I really latched onto this deck because it was fresh in my mind. And then I got to introduce it to my youngest kid, who's just about to turn 10, but was super into Encanto when it came out during, I think, the pandemic,
Yeah. Yeah.
height of the pandemic, right? So, of course, we would watch that incessantly. And my youngest made a little game of it. I taught them the rules, but they made their own
Huh.
objective. I told them that the objective was to gain 20 lore, and they were like, yeah, whatever. And they were
Says
doing
who?
yeah, and they were playing fine because they can read now. They're fine.
Hmm.
They're of a suitable age. Maybe they're the target demographic age, to be honest. 10-year-old Disney fan. But they made their own little goal, which was, I just want to get as many madrigals into this house as possible, and that's going to be my fun. And I thought that that was brilliant because,
Hmm.
you know, some players are just going to be out there and they're just going to want to make their own squirrel deck in Magic or something. Like, that's fun for them. That's how they made their fun, is to create a deck that let them play with characters that they thought would just be enjoyable to put together. They're sort of kind of like playing GI Joes or Barbie dolls together. They're just moving these pieces in thematic ways and creating a fantasy in their mind. And I really like how this game has that kind of toyetic quality to it, that thematic quality to it.
Yeah, as I said, it's incredibly playful for a competitive card game. Has those flavor moments are one of its real strengths. In that we spoke recently about, I think, about the sort of the Magic the Gathering archetypes of players. Like I think it's Timmy, Johnny, and Spike, and how what motivates you to want to play these games. And I think it was Johnny, or one of them at least, being inspired by theme and expressing creativity through the deck building more than just raw power, right? And I think Lorcana really plays to that type of character. You can build a deck all around one particular movie or one particular character. And that's partly why I wanted them to have the name the movie. Though if you're a super fan, I guess you're just going to know that, right? But yeah, there's some great moments of expression through the cards outside of their use in the actual competitive card game, right? And so as a competitive card game, I think that doesn't always cohere, especially in some of the such oversaturation of those characters. Like, here's a couple of Simba cards that are really flavorful and thematic, and then there's 20 other Simba cards that have like no ability whatsoever, or just he banishes a character when he quests. Like, it has some just arbitrary ability that doesn't really fit into the character at all, right? And so I think those flavorful moments are sometimes let down a bit by there being so many other non-flavorful moments. But you can lean into this game the way, like, you can focus on the elements that you really want to, I guess, is the thing.
Right. Yeah. If you look at a movie as a non-singular thing, there's many scenes in a movie, right? There's many points within a character art. The
One
Lion King
Simba
is
for every frame.
Yeah, Lion King is actually a really good example of that
Mm.
because you have the father Mufasa, you have the cub So you have the moment when he's just being born, you have the moment when he's just growing up and he just wants to be king, and then you have the moment when he's banished. And I'm sorry that I'm giving spoilers away for this like 30-year-old movie, but then he comes back and it's the once and future king returns, and he banishes his uncle Scar. So like each of those moments is a thing that you can make a card about, right? Because it shows that this is like a slice of this character's life, and you can do the fan services like, remember this, guys? Huh? Remember this? I'm pulling it out.
Thankfully, I don't think there's a card for the awkward teen Simba.
Oh yeah, the gross. Like I won't even go there. But yeah, you have those character synergies and things like that. So yeah, I like how this game is deep enough. I mean, some would argue that it's very, very shallow game, but it's deep enough that you can have performative, tactical, efficient decks, and then you can have very thematic, just colorful, flavorful decks, and you can have them both, and it serves both audiences. And let's be honest, there's at least those two audiences and more that would be attracted to this game.
Yeah. No, I will say it was one final point I wanted to make there was that those cards, because these are pre-established characters that come with their own baggage, that can be something of a constraint in terms of how they express themselves thematically within the game. Whereas like something like Magic, where they're inventing new characters, the mechanics define the character, right? So the character becomes known by their ability. But again, ultimately, that's not the biggest priority. If you really want to lean into the flavor in this game, there are some really great opportunities to do so.
Yeah, I think within the 100-year history of Walt Disney, there are enough moments where you can pull out an example where, oh, I have this mechanic. It's about building up characters. I need a trainer character. You can find a trainer character, right? Every single movie has that. Merlin or fairy godmother or Rafiki character in there who will serve that role, and they just kind of get dropped into place. And I think that they have a wide playground, I guess, to draw upon, a wide palette.
Yeah. So I think we want to start bringing this home a little bit. We want to talk a little bit about the, like you've hinted a couple of times about how this game fits in as a sort of a collectible game, and talk a little bit about how it works as a product line, perhaps.
Sure. So, well, we should state once again, reiterate that you can buy this game in a number of different formats. There's that 2-player starter pack, which is a newer product as far as I'm aware.
Gateway, I believe it's called, which is like a really bare bones, starts with a 30-card deck, very simple. And then as you play a couple of games, it starts adding in sort of a couple of cards at a time to expand these decks. So it's a even simpler version of the starter decks, basically.
Right. And then there's pre-constructed decks, which, as we mentioned, come in predefined set of 2 colors, 60 cards, and I believe one booster pack of what is it?
This is a little taste. I think it's 12 cards. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
Just a little taste in case you want to get more of another hit of those boosters.
And there were, what was it, 6 different sets in the initial release?
Well, the first set had 3 starter decks, and every set since has had 2 starter decks.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so it's a lot less than I thought. But those are obviously, the cards in there are easier to get because it's fixed. You're not going to be surprised, except for the cards in the booster. And of course, they have the probably the most commonly bought product will be the 10, 12 card booster, and you utilize those to do things like drafting.
So I will say when we first played this game, we played with those starter decks at the launch event, and I really felt that those starter decks are really good at teaching you how to play the game.
Right.
They're not great at giving you a sense at how the overall arc and strategy, and the full potential of what this game has to offer, because they're very predictable, low power decks that ramp up at a very predictable, steady pace. And it was very much of a sense of, it was very hard to have any sense of interruption, right? With if one person gets in ahead, there's not much opportunity for the other person to sort of interrupt that in any
I think
way.
this game inherently intentionally lacks interrupts, right?
Yes.
It doesn't have reaction type cards, for instance. There's no sort of like what is it called? The stack?
Yeah,
where
that's a big plus for me. I don't think the stack is a four-letter word as far as
yeah.
I'm concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, if you're unfamiliar, it's a concept from more complex TCGs like Magic the Gathering, where you can have situations where someone plays something, someone says, "Oh no, no," and then the other player says, "Oh no, no, no,
Counter
no."
spell, counter
Yeah,
spell, counter
counter,
spell.
counter, counter, and then it can sort of layer, and then
Mm.
you need a system by which
Resolution
to
order. Mm.
resolve the reactions so that it's all fair and square and it's not subjective, and you have to make an objective system, and that system for Magic the Gathering is called the stack, which I believe is a last in, first out resolution system, if I'm not
I think
mistaken.
so. So broadly, if I ever have to go to the stack to resolve anything in Magic, I'm too far in. I need to take a step back, right? I meant to talk about this earlier, and yeah, so Magic doesn't. Sorry, Lorcana does not have any sense of interaction or interrupted. You can't play anything on your opponent's turn.
Right.
So, which on one hand makes it a much more slower, predictable game. That there's no mind games, right? It's more of a long-term strategic play out than a tactical moment by moment mind game. I think there's pros and cons to that. I think on a player's turn, because you have so much agency, there's no combat phase and then main phase and second main phase and resolving stacks in between. There's no priority to check. You just on your turn, you can resolve your cards in whatever order you want. And you can be quite clever in how you do that. There are some cool opportunities for some tricks you can do in the order in which you play things out. It's incredibly flexible, and it might not be the most dynamic. But it's still quite a lot of expressivity and strategy to draw out of that. I think without overcomplicating things.
Right, and that's a great advantage. That's why it's so streamlined and so
Mm.
smooth to play and so quick to learn. And I think the games go pretty swiftly.
Mm.
But you can have cool deep turns where you are able to achieve a lot. Kind of reminds me of Dominion that way. I mentioned the original deck building game where you can have a turn that just like seems quite long because you cleverly strung a lot of actions and reactions internally within your play area and your hand, all in a row without the need for an interruption system. But on the counter side to this, a lot of players would say this is a minus, this is a detractor, this makes it a quote unquote baby game.
Magic for
Is
babies.
is what a lot of people call this,
Yeah.
and it's even less complex than a game which is already considered sort of Magic Junior, which is of course the Pokemon TCG.
Mm.
Long kind of considered probably the preeminent competitor to Magic the Gathering
Yeah, I've not actually
internationally.
played, so maybe we should be making more comparisons to Pokemon. I've not played that. I collected Pokemon cards when I was 10, never played the game. But I guess we've gone on the big tangent here. We were talking about starter decks.
Yeah.
And my point in all of that sidebar was to say I think that definitely is opportunities for comebacks and interruptions and breaking the flow of like one person pulls ahead and breaking that pace, but it doesn't really come up in those starter decks. But it doesn't give you a good sense of those meta strategies, right? You've got your aggro or your control or your mid, like those. I don't
Yeah.
even want to get into defining those topics, right? But that is absolutely possible to have that dynamic meta in this game. You're just not going to see how it's possible with those other decks.
I think that was intentional. Starter
Mm.
decks are always meant to be, or starter decks for young games, like Lorcana has been this past year, have are meant to be learning tools, right? You're not
Mm.
you don't want to scare off new players. You want them to be able to two novices to be able to pit their two starter decks against each other, just like we did
Mm.
a year ago on the launch day at Rain City Games, against each other without too much friction. And you're right. They're like a starting point. They're a scaffold, and they're probably mid-level power, if that. And you get the more variety from the more powerful, rarer cards, which can only be found in the boosters, and that's what they do for on purpose because they want to sell booster packs with each subsequent set that comes out.
Well, I will say though that as I've set 5, I've got the starter decks from set 5, and those are actually quite a bit more powerful. They really are becoming more interesting in the deck design with those starter decks. There's no longer a bunch of filler cards from like set 1 and 2 like there was in the first few starter decks. They're now all new cards, all quite they're all quite not necessarily powerful cards. They all have some place within the synergy. and they're just more interesting decks overall. And then on the hindsight, you also have that gateway. If you really would need now they have the gateway as a super entry point, the starter decks can become a little more interesting and expressive. And so I think they're now in a pretty good spot where there's a good entry point for multiple levels of player.
And that, with the succession of the subsequent sets that came out, that was a lot of S sounds, is intentional. It's called power creep. Every collectible game in existence since the inception of collectible, non-randomized collectible games too, like, for instance, Warhammer. Every game that comes out with a different set has to be more exciting to draw in new audiences. So a set that comes out is going to be tweaked a tiny bit so it's a little bit saucier, and the next item that comes out is a little bit spicier. The next set that comes out is a little bit spicier. So over time, as the months and the years progress, the power level of all the characters, just like Dragon Ball Z or something like that, becomes ever more substantial until they're basically at godly levels compared to what was the simple power level starting off in the early days. And I think this game is going to suffer from that. Thankfully, this game started out as such a low complexity point that it's probably going to grow into a fairly robust system. It's not quite there yet, but it's sort of on that upswing curve.
Yeah, I can see them adding in new card types. I can even see them finding a way to incorporate some kind of player interaction on opponents' turns. Right? They could even add in like trap card. You activated my trap card, or some degree of that down the road. I think right now it's in a good place. Because the thing is, ultimately, this game is not competing with Magic the Gathering. Right? If you're gonna come for the king, you better not miss. Right? There's no point to them trying to compete with Magic. Look at how many corpses of WoW killers are littering the ground around WoW.
Yeah, you're right. Magic players are not going to turn around and start playing Lorcana.
Yes.
That's just not something that's happening. I mean, it's happening for you and I know that you were a Magic player earlier on, but it's not as though you were an active Magic player.
Not invested.
You burned all your cards to play this. I think more likely, like the Pokemon trading card game, this will be sort of a gateway to more complex TCGs.
Yeah, they're absolutely right to try and target new audiences, new demographics, and creating an audience for themselves rather than trying stealing an audience from someone else.
Yeah,
right.
It's called widening the pie, right? Increasing the pie so that drawing from a new pool of users rather than cannibalizing the market that's there.
And you've mentioned before how collectible this game is, and I think that's absolutely one of the audiences they are pulling in is just people who want to collect the cards and don't have no interest in playing the games. There's the chase cards, those enchanted foils that everyone is paying hundreds of dollars for. There's the exclusives from various events that people are trying to track down. So I think it's easy to be cynical about that, but at the same time, that doesn't really affect the game itself. I mean, it's in some ways it's almost like the concept of whales in mobile games, and that it funds the game for everyone else. It keeps the game alive, right? Which again, I'm not gonna suggest that that's a healthy economic path, but as it plays out, I mean, it's certainly more healthy than Magic, and the chaos of the set release in that right now.
Oh wow! Don't even get me started on Wizards of the Coast. So I'll leave it right there. But yeah, shinies and collectibles, that's always going to be a draw for certain people. And you're right, like Pokemon TCG before it, there's going to be whole rafts of people that buy these cards just for the collector's sake, because there's plenty of well-heeled adult fans of Disney out there who will happily buy any new Disney-related product, especially if it has original artwork that shows their beloved characters in heretofore unseen scenarios, like Warrior, Snow White, for instance.
I do love that. I think it's Cinderella in a full suit of armor, and she's pretty badass.
Yeah, that's probably the one I was thinking of. You're right. So, shall we talk about how we feel about this game?
Yeah, let's start summing this up. I could talk all day about how like the benefits and downsides of the mana system and how Magic is both good and bad in its mana system and comparing those. I don't want to get too in the weeds. Ultimately, I think this is a fascinating experiment in that it gives you interesting decisions from turn one. It gives you a more consistent experience because you broadly know you can play one mana, play one card each turn. Broadly, it's a much more predictable, consistent way in which your deck is going to play out its synergy pretty predictably each game. For better or worse, there's not necessarily going to be a lot of variance in how each deck plays compared to other like Magic, for example, which has a lot of variance and interruptions in how things go. So it can be, not to say that it's boring, but that it's a little more predictable, especially for learning these games and getting into this. It's, as we said, it's an incredibly expressive game if you want to lead into those more flavorful, playful forms of deck expression. I think that's a real strength here. And it's just a real, like it's an incredibly streamlined, nice graphic design, nice cards to look at. At the end of the day, though, it is your interest in this is only ever going to be as strong as your interest in Disney, though, right? And it can never escape that and the baggage within.
Yeah, I agree. This game is a lovely product. It's well put together. Obviously, a lot of care is put into this. It's a high quality product. Ravensburger has done a good job with this design and with the execution, other than the product shortages at the launch, which I believe have been well smoothed out by now.
Mm.
So this game, I really, the funny thing is, I enjoyed myself quite a bit when you and I started playing in person a week or two ago, started getting back into the feel of this game. And I enjoyed myself immensely playing this with my youngest kid because I got to play with probably the intended audience, younger, more a novice at these sorts of collectible games. I think this is an ideal product for your first card game, for instance, kids' first trading card game, because it probably touches upon subject matter that they know. And the mechanics are gentle enough that it doesn't scare them off, not incessantly, not too much. So I think it's ideal for that. On the flip side, this game doesn't introduce anything new for me. I see where all the parts of the Frankenstein come from, and I see where they've been smoothed over and patched up in pretty ways, and how well it's been perfumed and costumed up. But to me, I would just much rather play some of those other games that are a little bit more idiosyncratic, a little bit wilder. They try for more broad, big gameplay differences. Like I love Keyforge to this day. Can't say much about the last few sets since it's changed owners, but the format of that game, I'm constantly surprised from that, even though there's no deck building associated with it. If you want the simple, like, collect a couple of cards and put some decks together, I can get that easily from digital card games like Eternal, like Hearthstone. I'm not really drawn to that sort of stuff. And once again, you're right. This game lives or dies by how much you love Disney. And while this can be all the more attractive because it has a license, it can be all the more unattractive because it has a license if you don't like that license.
It can never
There's no
escape
reason.
that. Yeah.
Right. Someone's going to write this right the heck off, if they know that they're not a huge Disney fan. And they might be missing a fun game if they do.
I mean, I will say, like, my daughter's just aging into sort of the peak Disney era now. She started to watch a few. She's picked out her favorite cards from my collection and put them into what she calls card blankets. In the card sleeves, so that's been very cute. I hope that she would be interested in playing one day. I don't want to force that. Like, it's not particularly a particularly healthy hobby to encourage, I guess.
Right.
But there's lots of casual ways of playing this. Like, you could buy those starter decks, especially now. Those starter decks are pretty great out of the box. Yesterday, I built my own decks for the first time. I did some of those those character pairings that I liked, and those are pretty good decks. Like, they're not going to win in any competitions, but they were like, it's pretty easy to put together a fun deck in this game. I found that are quite more dynamic than those original starter decks, and so I had quite a bit of fun with that, even in the deck building, which I've not really engaged with before in other games.
Nice. That's good to hear. I'm going to say one more downer that I felt about this game is that I've noticed this consistently in the games that you and I have played, and I played a couple with others, is that one issue that's a super anticlimax is that it's usually known who's going to win within maybe 2 to 3 turns from the last turn. So that much is quite an anticlimax. Basically, you can know before even relinquishing the turn to the next player that there's nothing. Say if I was the turn playing, there's nothing I can do to ramp it up. There's no way. I have no cards in my hand. I'm relying on the top draw. There's just no way. I can't do it.
It really feels like a game of chess when you put your opponent into check. It's like, I'm going to win next turn. Do something about it, right? And that can be like it can be quite dramatic. But if you're on the other side of that, it doesn't feel good to feel that, well, there's nothing I can do. I've got no like. So, and a more powerful decks obviously do have a lot of answers to interrupt, but at lower level play, matches can snowball.
Yeah, it's a game of chess if you were randomly dealt the pieces every time you played. Definitely, yeah. So that's a big bummer for me. Like, I like a game that's tense right up to the last moment. Who doesn't? Like we said about this entire thing, this game has a gentle ramp. It's very streamlined. It's very easy to play. But sometimes that's not what players are looking for. Sometimes they want something that's rambunctious and rowdy and uncertain. And this game is not that.
Yeah, I love me a TCG, but I'm a very casual player. I'm a casual Magic player, casual Lorcana player. I think Lorcana is very good for being a casual at.
Nice. Yeah, I think lots of people will enjoy this product. So if any of what we've discussed sounds attractive to you, I wholeheartedly support you there.
Absolutely.
For myself,
and lots of good opportunities to jump into it. So
yeah, this product still seems like it has some life in it. Yeah, so maybe it'll be the third pillar of TCGs.
Excellent.
All right, shall we leave it there?
Let's do it.
Okay. Now let's talk about the next featured episode so everyone has an opportunity to start playing. It's going to be a video game for one. Do you want to tell us about that game, Daniel?
Yeah, we're going to be playing Cult of the Lamb. So that is the roguelike cult simulator game. I've played this a year or so ago. I don't recall if I discussed it on the podcast previously, but I'm going to jump back in and Mark's going to experience it. And I think we have a special guest that we'll be announcing shortly too.
Very nice. Yeah, I played a little bit of this game, so I'll have to brush up myself. So if anyone out there is listening, go start playing Cult of the Lamb again, or for the first time, you have 2 weeks from when you hear this episode.
Excellent. Well, if you have any questions or comments on Lorcana or Cult of the Lamb or whatever else you have been playing, you can contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at omnigamers.club.
That's right. And you can check out our episodes on YouTube if you haven't yet. We publish those every time they come out, about weekly, our playlist episodes and our main feature episodes. And if you're watching them on YouTube, you can catch us on your podcatcher of choice. And on those platforms, definitely like and subscribe and feedback. Give us comments in any way possible. We love to see it. And maybe your comment will be featured on an episode when we shout it out. For instance, I got contacted by a listener on Discord of all places asking about RPGs and where can they start playing RPGs in Vancouver. The listener's name is Bruce. I hope it's okay to share that. So I sent a little bit of information. Maybe we'll reach out to you directly. So do let us know. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we would love people to join the club and play along with us and give your own perspective. And you can find more of myself at Blue Sky and Instagram at Board Game Feast.
Right, and you can catch me at omnigamermark on Facebook and on Blue Sky as well. So it was lovely talking to you, Daniel.
Likewise.
Until the next, yeah, that's right. Until the next playlist episode. Everyone out there, I hope you have a balanced diet of gaming.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.